Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. My name is Brenda Parley. I'm the Beeler Chair in Northern Climate Change and Sustainability. I'd first like to acknowledge what a wonderful group of people this is. It's always nice to get together and learn from one another, and I think you'll be wonderfully inspired by what we're going to hear tonight from Dahti Tsetso. I'd also like to acknowledge that where McGill sits on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe people, which has long been a meeting place as well for other Indigenous peoples. Tonight, we're very honored to host Dahti, who I've known for many years. This is the 23rd or 24th, but who's counting, annual environment lecture, and very pleased to be the host here tonight, as well as seeing so many wonderful colleagues from the Beeler School of the Environment and great students who are in for a treat as far as learning tonight. I'll just say a few words to introduce Dahti. She's a member of the Tsetso Nation, currently lives in Yellowknife, born in Fort Simpson, Northwest Territories. Beautiful part of the northern part of Canada, but also the traditional territory and the sovereign land of many Indigenous peoples. Dahti has a Bachelor of Science, a combined degree from the University of Alberta between Native Studies and Environment and Conservation Sciences. So very inspiring background as well. A diploma from the University of Victoria in Indigenous Language Revitalization. She's worked for over 20 years in advocacy on conservation issues in collaboration with and as a leader with her nation. She worked for the Tsetso First Nations for 11 years, thought it was 10, but it's 11, and was the lead negotiator in the development of Canada's first Indigenous protected area. Which is something you're going to learn a little bit more about tonight, the Edigi protected area. She then went on to work with the Indigenous Leadership Initiative. Very honored as well to have Val Courtois here from ILI, inspiring work that ILI has done across the country. I just keep using the word inspiring because I feel very honored to have the opportunity to know and work from time to time with Dahti and Val. In 2021, Dahti was part of the ILI, and they've done developed numerous initiatives, including the development of the Guardians program across Canada, which is a network of incredibly passionate people taking care or stewarding their lands and resources, doing many different things across Canada's Arctic as well as other territory. She is currently the Executive Director, Chief Executive Officer of Our Land for the Future Trust, which you're going to hear about tonight. That initiative has brought $375 million in donor and government funding to support Indigenous-led conservation. It's an innovative model which is not only important in Canada as we think about Canada's commitments under the Canadian or the Global Biodiversity Framework, but is also important as another inspiration to Indigenous peoples around the world who are also working to conserve and steward their lands in ways that not only nurture biodiversity, but nurture culture and language and livelihoods. So with that, thank you, Dahti, for taking time to join us this evening and making the trip all the way from Yellowknife. And we'll have time for questions after Dahti's presentation. And thank you again for coming.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Masi sedzi Dahti Tsetso won't God's Si clicho deneote. Se mo Gabriel Mackenzie Scott Uge, Gotsen se ta, Patrick Scott Uge. Somba ke Gotsen Lili Quen Gotsen ate. Deson tai. Duhe masine dusi enethe Gotsen sedse ta. Si nye nahe guinde. So in Denejati, I said, thank you. My name is Dahti Tsetso. In Dene culture and most Indigenous cultures, we always orient who we are by introducing our parents. So my parents are Patrick and Gabriel Mackenzie Scott from Yellowknife. I'm very grateful that I have two places that I consider home, Yellowknife and Fort Simpson, Northwest Territories. I'm a mother of three, and that's a really important part of my own personal story. And this evening, I'm very happy and I'm very honored to be here with you all. So I just express that my heart is happy to speak with you all tonight. So thank you. I wanted to thank Brenda for inspiring the invitation to have me come tonight. I first met Brenda when I was still a university student at the U of A. She was my professor some time ago. And I just also wanted to give a special recognition and thank you to Austin and Shannon for all your support in helping me to get here. And I was not expecting Valerie to join tonight. And so I'd like to also give a special mention, acknowledgement of Valerie Couture, who has been my mentor, was my boss at the ILI, but also my friend. And I'm grateful that you came. So thank you. So I'm excited to share some of my story. And really, it's not so much my story because it's what I've been taught and what's been mentored in my learning as an Indigenous woman, as a Dene woman. Today, everywhere, we're really very much experiencing the rapid effects of climate change. The landscape is changing in ways that we can't predict, in alarming ways. We're feeling these impacts everywhere, but it's particularly in the north, where I'm from. In 2021, my own home community at the time of Fort Simpson was severely flooded. And over the last 5 years, our neighboring communities have been evacuated and flooded more times than I can even count. We've experienced extreme forest fire in the north, changing water levels. We've been experiencing invasive species, changes in water temperature. The list goes on and on and on, actually. In 2023, we had a very dramatic fire year. 70% of our territory was evacuated due to forest fire. I have personally housed a home-based evacuation center twice in the last 4 years, which is not a stat I'm happy to share. So clearly, the way in which we're nurturing our relationship to the land around us, the way that we're, as a society, making decisions about the land around us is not working. Something's quite wrong. And the land is telling us this in no unclear terms. So as a world and as societies, we need to learn to change. We need to learn to respond to these changing realities around us. And Canada as a country needs to play a lead role. We all really need to work together in order to find solutions, because even though the world is so big, we're actually all very much connected, and we need to honor these connections. At an international level, and Brenda, you mentioned this in the introduction, Canada has made some very big commitments in their attempt to try and address some of these challenges that we're facing globally. One of them has been the biodiversity commitments, and another has been the 30 by 30 mandate, so protecting 30% of Canada by 2030. One of the things that I've learned in the course of my work and in working with my communities is that it's our communities that have to be supported in our leadership in this way. Indigenous communities all across the country, but really all across the world, are very much leading the way. And what I hope to see happen as we continue to find solutions together is the starting of the shifting of a framework. And in many ways, I'm witnessing and have been part of the shifting of this framework to ensure that Indigenous perspectives, Indigenous worldviews are guiding and leading decision-making as opposed to informing it. Indigenous worldview, Dene worldview, is fundamentally different than the prevailing worldview, and it's something I've taken, I think, for granted the majority of my life. Because when it is your culture, when it is your way of understanding the world, it's just normal. It's just normative. And as I've grown and learned in this work, I've started to understand that it's my normal is not everyone's normal, and that there's a lot of value in that the lessons in which our elders teach us, our communities teach us, and the way in which we walk in the world that could be shared and that others can learn from and benefit from. Fundamental to this understanding is the concept, and you'll hear it, I think, often from Indigenous peoples in our communities, is that we are part of the land. The land is part of us. And so I wanted to share a little bit about what I've learned. If I go back in time a little bit, I was maybe midway through my career with the Tsetso, and our communities were facing some big political changes in the territory was undergoing devolution, meaning federal government was transferring powers to the territorial government, and it was causing all kinds of shifts in administrative decision making. Where I'm from, they weren't thrilled about this entirely. There are in the NWT, we are a bit different than other parts of Canada where modern land claim and self-government agreements are very common. And so the Tsetso is undergoing a negotiation for self-government. And that shift in administrative decision-making from the federal to the territorial government had all kinds of ripple effects where I'm from. And there was quite a lot of frustration brewing within my community around this. And so we went and were inspired to learn from others. We had an opportunity to hear from Miles Richardson, who's a former president of the Haida Nation. And he shared his very inspiring story about the Haida, which I will not attempt to recreate for you because nobody can quite do Miles justice. He's very inspiring, and he's I very distinctly remember him pounding the table and encouraging us all to be who we say we are. But part of that meant going back into our communities and asking the question to our leadership, what does it mean to take leadership in the Dene way? And I remember telling the negotiating team for the land claim agreement that I was going to work with the elders and the community members in this way, because at the time I was working in the environment department. And the lead legal counsel asked me, like, what does that even mean? What does it mean? And I was like, I don't know, but I'm going to go ask and I'll tell you. So we gathered in Trout Lake, just outside a small community. It's sort of in the more southern portion of the Northwest Territories. It's a very traditional community. They don't have year-round access to this community. So you can only fly in, I'd say, 8 months of the year, and maybe 2 months of the year they have a seasonal winter road where you are literally driving over muskeg, lakes, rivers, creeks to get to their small community. And as a result, they're very traditional. So they really managed to preserve a lot of language and culture and ways of thinking. So I thought that's the perfect place to go. So we went to Trout Lake, and I hosted a 3-day on-the-land workshop with community members, elders, leaders, and I asked that question. What does it mean to take care of the land and lead from a Dene perspective? And what they shared back was absolutely incredible to me, because I had gone in with a very, I think, Western way of thinking. I thought we were going to sit with maps on the table and strategize around how we were going to have presence on the land and create research centers and assert strategically. I remember that word, strategically, mapping. That's not at all what they wanted to speak about. And what they shared to me was being on the land protects the land. And what they meant by that was, as Dene people, we already know how to take care of the land. We've been doing it since time immemorial. And all we need to do, young lady, is just keep doing what we've always been doing. What they shared very clearly is that we do this by following our Dene laws and our Dene values and our Dene principles. And those laws they're very simple laws. Share what you have. Help each other. Respect your elders. Respect the land. Sleep at night, work during the day. Be polite, do not argue. Be happy. But there's core teachings behind these laws about gratitude, about honoring connection, about respecting people who've come before you, and about respecting your relationship to each other. These are all the sort of core lessons in these laws. And what I noticed over the course of my career is that these values are reflected in Indigenous cultures, not just where I'm from, but really across Canada and really across the world. Everywhere I go, when I meet other Indigenous people, I see my own story, my own teachings, my own elders reflected in their communities. And what you also will find is that Indigenous peoples play a disproportionate role in protecting the earth. We make up less than 6% of the global population, and yet Indigenous peoples steward roughly 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity. There's a link between the way in which we understand the world and the way in which we take care of the world. So having Indigenous peoples on our lands, being who we say we are, protects the land. And this was a really incredible lesson that I did not expect to receive, which now, with some maturity and age, is very obvious to me, but at the time it was not. And sometimes this translates to really simple examples. In 2015 or 16, when I was still with the Dahti First Nations, there's a pipeline that goes from Norman Wells to Zama. It's run by Enbridge. And it went in the ground in the 80s. At the time, our communities didn't have a lot of say in stopping that pipeline, even though there was not much support for it. So it was put in. And they had all kinds of fancy tools as an oil company to monitor that pipeline. Inline inspection tools, they're called. But around 2015, 2016, their pipeline started leaking and they had no idea. And it was our people on the land, hunting and harvesting, who discovered incredible oil spills. So being on the land protects the land because our people are out there monitoring and watching the land. Just by practicing our way of life, we were able to, the harvesters in my community were able to notify the company of this incredible spillage. And it speared years of pipeline restoration work because even though they had all these incredible technological tools, they did not know their pipeline was leaking and leaking significantly. In fact, it was the Dahti First Nations Grand Chief Herb Norwegian who first alerted that company to the slopage on the riverbank, which caused a complete shutdown of their pipeline because their pipeline was being compromised from erosion around the Mackenzie River. So when I say being on the land protects the land, that it strengthens our understanding of the world and our way of life, it means that we're there to do those things. And that's really important. So in order for us to do this, we must continue strengthening who we are as Indigenous peoples. And when I was in Trout Lake, the other surprising lesson that was shared to me was the importance of the language. Again, I went in there thinking we were going to map, and instead what they spoke to me about was laws, language, laws, values, and principles. But the other strongest message they imparted, the second strongest message, or perhaps maybe the strongest message they imparted, was the importance of our language. Where I'm from, my parents' generation are first language speakers. My grandparents' generation was unilingual Dene speakers. My generation is losing the language. That's a problem. And they shared to me in Trout Lake, the problem is that our language is a key component in understanding who you are as a Dene person, but also understanding the world around you in a Dene way. Because what they shared is that that understanding of Dene values isn't easily translated into English. And the heart of that lesson is actually best taught in the language. And so the elders in that workshop in Trout Lake were extremely alarmed about the loss of our language and the growing trend of people of my generation and coming behind me of not speaking our language. And so what they mandated to me in my role was, in order for us to take leadership in taking care of the land, you have to help us take care of our language. And that was something I was very, 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 very surprised to learn, because I was an environmental coordinator, but I was being told in order to do my job, I had to take care of language. And it all has to do with being who we are. And this is not necessarily an obvious link. When you think of conservation, you don't think of indigenous languages. And yet, approximately 70% of all languages on Earth are spoken in regions of high biodiversity. There is a very strong link to language and understanding the world around you. And so their lesson to me is true. So the third core message that they shared, and this one did not surprise me at all, was the importance of connecting our elders to our youth, but also our youth to our elders. In Indigenous cultures, intergenerational connection is a fundamental value. We are taught from a very young age to always honor our elders. Our elders always honor our babies. It's a very strong way in which that, in a cultural value. But in their sharing to me during this Trout Lake workshop, what they said was, elders have a lot to teach the young people, but the young people also have a lot to teach the elders. And so we need to help facilitate these connections so that way young people can learn how to be Dene into the future, but also elders can also be strengthened by learning, the knowledge that young people have that they don't have. In a modern context, this can be a challenge. There's a lot of competing priorities, a lot of competing things for our attention. And also residential schools have left a very deep scar within our communities. My generation, and I feel like every generation coming after me, we hold a really deep responsibility to ensure that we're doing our part so that many, many, many generations into the future, we can still say we are Dene. In Clincho culture, we have a saying, to be strong like two people. And what it means is that sort of recognition that to exist in the modern world, you have to live in the modern world. So you have to become strong in a modern way of living. And yet we are Clincho. So you also need to be strongly connected to what that means, what it means to be a Clincho person. So it means strengthening your language and way of life. And if you can do that and do that well, then you can become strong like two people. My sisters and I have often shared with one another the sense that the sense of like responsibility we feel like we carry, not just as a person of our generation, but also because we come from two cultures. I have a non-Dene dad and a Dene mom. And it means that I am blessed to be able to navigate two worlds. And so I often feel a sense of, we've often talked about our shared sense of feeling of responsibility to translate between these worlds. so that these worlds can better understand one another. Because we need to find ways to honor our connections in order for things to change, and change in a positive way. I graduated university with those degrees that Brenda spoke about, and I spent 5 years obtaining them. And I remember going home and feeling like I had had enough of institutional learning, and I was ready to sit around a fire with my elders, learn how to scrape moose hide, learn to speak my language, learn how to cut meat. I was ready to invest in learning my own stories of my own people and our own history. And anyone who's worked with me in the north knows I'm Clincho, but I'm very, very connected to the Dahti region. They helped mentor a lot of this teaching in me in many ways. So I'm a very proud student of the University of Dahti. And if I had some of those elders in here today, they would probably be hooting and hollering about that. Yeah, for sure. What I do know is that by working together, we can achieve great things. In my early stages of my career, I didn't realize that as, a young Dene woman in a small little northern community of 1,000 people, seemed like so far away from everyone, that we could have an impact, and that we could have a connection to people around the world, and that our actions really actually mattered. But I've learned how connected the world is since, and one of the biggest lessons has been how important partnerships are, because they're actually fundamental to building big dreams and realizing those dreams come to life. So I wanted to share 2 of those core experiences. Val was a key part of the second one. But the first one was Edegi. Edegi is an area, and you can kind of see behind my text a map of this area. It exists between Yellowknife and Fort Simpson. It is actually the traditional territory of the Dahti and the Clincho. So I have a lot of my own family history in this area. My grandfather, I'm not sure what his Dene name would have been, but eventually he started to get called the last name Mackenzie, because the English name of this river is Mackenzie, across the Horn Plateau at least. But my mother talks about him always traveling over the Horn Plateau to Fort Simpson, and you can sort of see Fort Simpson on the map. So he would travel over this horn, over this area. But in the 90s, the Dahti leaders started to talk about wanting to protect this area because it was so significant to them. There are 4 communities: Petsiki, Tlidlikwe, Tsetso, and Degagoti. The Degagotine, Fort Providence, Wrigley, Jean Marie, and Fort Simpson. And there are some very significant oral histories about this area. There are predictions in our culture, in our stories about the future, and it doesn't look good. Those stories talk about the water disappearing, and how important it'll be to protect this area. And in fact, if you go into the north and you talk to the communities who are working to protect, you're going to hear a lot of those stories, how important it will be to protect the water for the future. Edegi in the 90s, well before people were worried about climate change, in the 90s, our elders were talking about wanting to take care of this area. And so those 4 communities came together and started working through a process to protect the land. And in my roles with the Dahti, Grand Chief Herb Norwegian pulled me in to ask me to lead the finalization of this area. So I came in and got a big hurrah at the end, I feel like, in many ways, because there were so many elders and leaders and community members who invested many times, many years, many hours, many meetings, were involved in many studies to work to advance the Edegi protected area. In 2018, Edegi was protected. It resulted in quite a large area, about 14,000 square kilometers in protection. Uniquely, it was recognized under Canadian law, but also under Decho Dene law. So it's been heralded as one of the first Indigenous protected areas. But what's been really cool about Adégie is not so much the boundary and the protection itself, but the impact it's had on the people. And this is what I mean about a new way of investing in conservation and thinking about conservation, because Adégie is managed and led by the Decho. And it means that all of the things I've been speaking about, they've invested into the management of this area. So the way that they approach managing this area is to strengthen their relationship to the land. So we have guardians who go out into this area and they monitor, but they also create and open up old trails that our people used to travel. They also go into the schools and teach kids how to trap. They also support communities to run language programs. They also hunt and distribute that meat in our communities. They monitor for sure. They do research for sure, but that's not their only mandate. They're managing this area in a very different way than typically you see in conservation, and they're not the only one. Litsoke has been leading the Thaidene protected area, which is a park and Indigenous protected area outside of Litsoke. Fort Good Hope with Tuyata has been doing the same. And so in the north, these three areas have been kind of like a flagships of what it means to protect the land in the Dene way, but also in partnership. So what you see in the draft management plan for Adégie, which was fairly recently released, are management goals, which you don't see the word biodiversity in there at all. Keep Adégie healthy and strong. Respect and promote Dene Athite. Dene Athite is, I am Dene. Work in harmony as guardians of Adégie. But the beautiful thing about honoring those management objectives for Adégie is that you're going to have all of the benefits of biodiversity and all of the benefits that are guided in traditional conservation frameworks of understanding and prioritizing decision making. The other more recent experience that I've had professionally, and Val was a key part of this. So this is very much a shared story, definitely not my story. It was shared by everyone who supported this initiative. And as you can see, just by the listing of Indigenous governments alone on the slide, there was a lot of people involved. The Our Land for the Future agreement was signed and celebrated in November of 2024, so fairly recently. It was signed off by 25 partners in total. 21 of those were Indigenous government signatories, but it was also signed by the territorial government, the federal government, and private partners. 3 signed formally, but there's actually a whole collaborative of them. So what it's going to support, and Brenda's right, it's a large trust, I think, if I'm not incorrect, the largest land trust for Indigenous communities in the world, actually. And what's inspired it is the ambition of Indigenous leaders and elders and community members in the North. Because of our way of understanding the world, as you could imagine, the ambition to take care of land is high where I am from. We also have a very large territory. And so what the agreement does, it's a financial agreement at its heart. It doesn't create the areas. It doesn't, by signing off this agreement, it's not like areas came into being, because as a trust, there's not jurisdiction. We don't hold jurisdiction. Indigenous governments hold the jurisdiction. Public governments hold the jurisdiction. So they need to work together to advance the ambitions of Indigenous governments. And once they meet their priorities, then the trust is holding resources in the waiting to support their outcomes. So we can support things like the identification work, the work towards establishment. Once they get established, then the management of those areas. We can also support guardians. There's a host of things that the trust supports. But the ambition of our Indigenous governments at the starting point is 380,000 square kilometers, with and that's existing and new. But what we learned in exploring the initiative with Indigenous partners is there was a number of our partners around the table I'm pointing at my screen, but I should point at that screen, who identified their interest, but hadn't yet identified a boundary, hadn't yet done the mapping work. And so we know that this is the starting point of interest. This past year was our inaugural year of implementation. So I worked alongside Valerie as the Deputy Director of the ILI. The ILI was tasked with the responsibility of convening this table. And in my role, Val tapped me to lead it, which was incredible and hard, but incredible. But this past year, I've shifted now to continue honoring the relationships here, but also the responsibility that it entails. And in the first year, we've distributed $21.6 million to those Indigenous partners on the slide. That's going to be invested directly into their stewardship ambitions. So that's support for 9 areas undergoing protected area identification, 9 areas working towards establishment, 6 areas that are already under management, already established, and they needed resourcing. The development of an expansion of 8 newish programs. They're not exactly new, but they're newish. And then expanding 10 very well-established programs. So it's actually very exciting because we're at the starting point of sort of a new chapter. And already we have results. I think the driving interest of the Government of Canada and our private partners was very much the potential for new protected areas, meeting the 30 by 30 mandate. And immediately in this first inaugural year, we've had one Indigenous partner contribute a very significant area of land into CPCAD. So we're already advancing towards the goals of our public and private partners. But it's not so much about those hectares. It's never about the hectares for our communities. It's always so much more than conservation for us. It's really about the people. I've told this story so many times, but you're a new audience except for Val. Back when I was initiating or just starting on this journey, trying to understand, I think in that same meeting that I talked about Miles saying, be who you say you are, the other delegation that was in the room giving us their lessons and sharing their work was the Australian Rangers who had come over from Australia. So sat and listened to all of the incredible work they're doing for something they were calling Indigenous protected areas that their federal government was infusing resources into. And I thought, how do we get that here? But what really struck me in this discussion was there was a young man who was about my age. And he was presenting on behalf of his communities. He'd travel all the way from Australia to Yellowknife. And he was talking about being a little guy growing up in his community and watching the rangers in his community take care of the land. Well, they call it the country there. They use different words. Take care of country. And he looked up to them and he wanted to be them. And he talked about growing up wanting to be a ranger for his people one day. And it really, really struck me. And it never left me because he grew up not wanting to be a doctor or a policeman or a firefighter. He grew up wanting to be a ranger because he had this example of leadership and mentorship within his community. And I thought, I want that for my children. I want that for kids all across the North to grow up wanting to be guardians, be able to step into these roles, to honor these responsibilities. My oldest son just turned 18. My daughter is about to turn 16, and my youngest is 7. And with the signing of that agreement, all of that actually becomes possible because now we're infusing incredible resources within our Indigenous communities that will enable them to have opportunities to step into those roles, but also see those people in leadership roles within our community. About a year ago, I had a very full circle moment. We were on the precipice of signing off this incredible trust agreement. I had left my roles with the DFN, but my son and I were driving home, and he was asking me about what Darren did, because Darren was his friend's dad, and Darren worked for Adeji, and they were posting pictures on social media about all of their work. And he was like, Mom, what does Darren do? He works for ADG. And I said, well, he's a guardian coordinator. So he works with the guardians and they do X, Y, and Z. And he said, but they're just going out on the land. Are they getting, they're getting paid to be Dene? I said, yeah, actually they are. And he was like, maybe I could do that one day. And he didn't know, but I just about burst into tears because it was such an incredible full circle moment for me personally to have him mirror the story of that Australian ranger I had heard so long ago. And it all comes back to this. At the end of the day, what I've learned the most is that everything is really rooted in relationship. And that building good relationship is key to unlocking inspiring potential. A long time ago, somebody very wise shared some very good advice with me. And what they said was, in order to seed success, in order to get where you want to get going, people need to see themselves reflected back in the vision that you're building. And that's what I hope to keep doing. I hope to keep finding ways to bring us all together. And that vision is something that I don't think just our communities hold. I think we all hold responsibility in that vision. We all hold responsibility to ensure a good future. So we all must take care of each other. Masi Joe.
Amazing.
Oh,
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Dahti, we have time for questions, about 15 minutes of questions. If, I have many myself, but help moderate.
I have a mic right here. I can bring it to anybody.
All right. Super.
I have a question.
It works. Yes. Okay. There you go.
Hi, Tansei. My name is Sarah. It's nice to be with you today, and thank you so much for speaking today. It's very inspiring, and it's kind of aligned with like my dreams right now. I'm a mixed race as well. My dad's side is Cree, Neowin, Métis, and Irish, and my mother is Japanese and Russian. But I feel very drawn to my Indigenous roots. But I can see in both worlds. And that's one of the gifts that I have. So, question about that fund. Is that fund open to all nations, all homelands, all leaders?
well, I feel you might be disappointed to learn that no. It was collaboratively drafted, and its beneficiaries are those who are signatories to the agreement. So, and not the Indigenous government signatories, I should be clarify. So those, the Indigenous governments whose names I listed are the ones who benefit from the fund. There are other examples of these types of agreements in other parts of Canada. The Coast Fund is one. They've been in existence for some time. I think they didn't call it. It's following a financial mechanism known as Project Finance for Permanence, which is a word I haven't had to say in a long time. But it's effectively just public and private dollars in a matching ratio. Private dollars leveraging more public dollars to do incredible work at a big scale over a long time. And the Coast Funds had one that it wasn't even called PFP at the time, but their success, like success breeds success. So the fact that they were able to show responsible fiscal management, but then also the achievement of key objectives over time, sure helped us in the North, I gotta tell you that. And then QIA, the region in Nunavut, they also established a PFP on basically the same timeline as the NWT. Here in Ontario, There's another one underway, but they've had some more challenges. So the Omushkego is another example of it. But I know I just did a presentation a few weeks ago to the Manitoba leadership. And I know in the Yukon, I did one before Christmas in the Yukon, and I feel like nations sort of all across Canada, it's such an interesting thing where like, I can't say it enough, like success breeds success. So in us kind of rising and having success here, it enables us to create space as others have before us, like the coast for us, to demonstrate why there's value here, why it makes sense to do it this way. So I'm sorry to tell you that, unfortunately, it's just those communities or those governments in the north that benefit. But it's inspiring. And so I hope that it will help trigger more of these types of approaches in other parts of Canada.
When you speak of the coast, are you talking about BC?
Sorry, yes, yep.
Were they the sort of the leaders
In many ways, yes. I think when you think about Indigenous-led conservation, you can see leadership all across the country, actually. And so, but the coast have been incredible in their leadership. And I remember when I was with the DFN, I had an opportunity to go to one of their coastal stewardship gatherings. And I thought, like, how in the heck do you guys do all this stuff? And then when the PFP opportunity came to the north and I learned that they had an early PFP-like model resourcing their work, I was like, well, of course, they can do all this stuff. They have the resourcing to do it. So that's really exciting to me because it means that what I hope to see over the next 10 years is my own backyard sort of being able to bolster our capacity and then like demonstrate that value and basically change and transform the north. Because one of the things I didn't touch on is just the incredible transformative impact it has within our communities. We're land-based people, so when we take care of land, it takes care of us in like the best way. It's healing. There's been people I've witnessed in this work who've been able to like conquer their addictions and have stepped into leadership, and like kids who have grown up in the programs and have stepped into guardian roles. Like the social benefit of this within our communities is enormous. It's so incredible. So it's so much more than conservation. I can't say it enough. But yeah, there's been coast, there's the Innu, there's been so many examples of leadership across.
Amazing. I think there's a couple other questions here. Powerful.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Masicho Dahti. And for those I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Giselle Yasmin, and I'm at the Max Bell School of Public Policy here at McGill. Something I've been following, this reminded me of something I've been following for a while that's also north of 60 is Deshinta Bush University. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, that's where you learn off the land. It's a very alternative model or a Indigenous model of education. I'm just wondering if they've been involved with your work as well, and if you could describe it.
No, I haven't worked for them or with them, but I've presented in there to their students. Like I did a similar style talk like this, but I was sitting around a campfire. And that's like the heart of their model, right? They're a bush university, so you go on the land and you learn from elders. So they very much are honoring a lot of what I shared today, but as a post-secondary institution. So trying to give young people the opportunity to gain post-secondary credentials while also, going on the land. So it's a really pretty neat thing.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm loud. I'm loud enough.
Oh yeah, no, it's good for the video.
Okay, is that better? Thank you very much for sharing your incredible work with us tonight. I just found it really moving and inspired. So I think that's why that word keeps coming up. My question for you is about how people who haven't been blessed with cultures that are rooted in land how can settler populations support Indigenous leadership in these ways if we want to help and not get in the way? Do you have ideas about like
ways to offer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I do. I mean, so this is the thing. It's so important that you and others see yourselves reflected back in this vision. I will tell you that there are some incredible non-Indigenous people who are working in this field who are lending their strengths and their abilities to support communities in incredible ways. Sometimes it's administratively supporting communities. Sometimes it's advisory. I have the daughter of one of our senior advisors here. She's a dear friend now. Her name's Kathy. She's non-Indigenous, but she's been an incredible part of our story, supporting us navigate spaces that are less familiar, like Ottawa. So I think there are many, 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 many ways. You do not have to be Indigenous to enter into this work. And that's part of the beautiful thing about it. If you're a researcher, if you're a biologist, we want your partnership. We want your support. If you're great at technology and communication, we'd love you to help us tell this story. There's any and every sort of type of skill set that you may hold could be is welcome. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I would just encourage. Encourage.
Thank you.
Time for a couple more questions. This is wonderful discussion.
Hi, I'm just a bit curious about IPCAs a little more. Like, what does that designation even mean? Like, how long does that take to get? Like, are there benefits that come with that, like resources or funding? Like, what's the process like in Canada for that?
That's a really good question. So Indigenous protected and conserved areas are relatively new sort of terminology. And they really, they came out of a report called We Rise Together, which was, I'm not exactly sure what the right word is, but there was a group of folks that Val and I both know who are tasked with the responsibility by the Government of Canada to kind of go across Canada, talk to Indigenous communities, and have a better understanding of how Indigenous communities could support Canada in meeting like 30 by 30. Like that's kind of my rough understanding of the We Rise Together report. So they interviewed folks like me and others as they toured across Canada, and they heard this story that I just shared. And so what they kind of recommended is that Indigenous protected and conserved areas are a potential way forward. And the challenge is that there isn't a singular definition of what an IPCA is. There isn't a singular framework for it and almost you couldn't by their very nature, because they're intended to honor the leadership of the people of that area. So what works for, the Anishinaabe here would be different, similar, but different than maybe what would work for me as a Dene person from the Northwest Territories. And really the authority from them is from community, from within a community. So it really is dependent on a community answering the question themselves. What does it mean to honor our relationship to our land? What does it mean to honor our stewardship over that land? How do we assert that authority as Indigenous peoples? What does that look like? So it's not a question I could singularly answer, because really communities need to ask themselves those questions and then find the answer. So for EDG, what it looked like in that context was our assembly came together and passed a resolution. Actually, this is them passing the resolution in that picture to establish EDG as an Indigenous protected and conserved area, and they asserted Decho Dene law over this area. And in the resolution, they defined what it meant. But that didn't flow resources. It's not like them making that decision unlocked resources. What unlocked the resources was the dual designation from the Government of Canada as a national wildlife area under the Canadian Wildlife Act. And so that's part of the dodging sort of challenge around IPCAs is the resourcing question. So you have Indigenous communities who have agency, who have vision and ambition, and that is, I think, going to be some of the interesting maybe policy work that's going to evolve over the next while. And I suspect in the NWT, it's going to be an interesting way. It's going to be interesting to see the way in which it plays out. Now that I work for the Trust and I'm still working with all of those Indigenous partners, there's a huge IPCA vision. They all want to protect the land using their own laws. Never mind Canada. Never mind the territorial government. Let's use our own laws to protect our own land. But what does that mean? And how does that play within the broader landscape of resource decision making within regulatory systems when mining and oil and gas may be a competing value? So it's not really a very straightforward answer, but it's not a straightforward discussion either.
For one last question, I think.
Hopefully I don't trip down these stairs.
This might be left field question. I just read that Canada has finally met its 2% military expenditure target. Hooray for us. And I had thought that one of the ways that we were spending that was across the North broadly, with the new funding for rangers of some kind. And I'm wondering if there's any link or potential link between the kind of presence that you're talking about and the military money, or in general, what you think of all that.
So the trust I just presented on, it's not like we're going to get any of those defense dollars, but if I have my way, maybe we will. Because you're right, Carney in his leadership has announced incredible investments in military spending, huge investments in the NWT, unprecedented investments, and large investments into infrastructure projects. Two key ones, the Mackenzie Valley Highway, which has been underway for decades effectively, but not successfully. And then another one called the Arctic Security Corridor from Yellowknife to Grace Bay. And what I know, and I'm quoting our former MP, Michael McLeod, in order to have a strong economic development strategy, you need a strong conservation strategy. So these are, in the work that I do, we're often pitted against economic development and industry. But I know we're actually just two sides of the same coin. And so what I am keen to see over the next 10 years as the Trust works with partners around their conservation and stewardship ambition is how that strengthens the northern economy generally, because it's going to create certainty. You need certainty. But certainty, because we're going to be hiring guardians all up and down our valley, it really begs to me the question of how do we then also link into initiatives like this, these defense investments? How do we see ourselves in that story? How do we see ourselves reflected back in that vision? And that is something I've been asking myself since I've heard about these investments and since I suspected they were coming, because the politics have been shifting under our feet as we finished the agreement. Like when we started, the driving federal interest was CPCAT, hectares and protected areas, and now it's shifted and now it's military spending. So we're a 10-year trust. It's going to be important that we think through all of the narratives and sort of the geopolitical landscape around us in order to create sustainability in the work. So I don't have the question, or I don't have the answer again, but what I do see the potential for opportunity if done right. But time will tell.
Great question. Thank you, Dahti. I'd like to, welcome you.